Hello. Today I'd like to talk about dominant extroverted intuitive types and problem solving. Extroverted intuition solves problems in the real world by referring them back to the unconscious. This can give them a very marked ability to solve problems in a quick and efficient fashion without getting bogged down in unnecessary details. However, this dependence on the unconscious does come with several drawbacks. First, they struggle to give account of their answers since they just seem to come from within or from without, and there isn't any real rational process they can point to for their decision making. This can make it difficult for other types to accept the validity of their answers because they are at bottom rationally inexplicable. Another problem with this dependence on the unconscious is that it means that if they're not in a state of intuitive flow, they can often struggle to solve problems that are before them, which can give them something of an avoidant attitude in these cases. Additionally, if they're not in intuitive flow, it's not unusual for them to lose confidence in themselves and adopt a rather meek and avoidant mental stance towards practical questions. To a limited extent, this can probably be overcome by a conscious attempt to develop the lesser functions more, but naturally NE is always going to be the most marked and will always pull them towards itself. One of the difficulties in trying to develop the lower functions is that the dominant function frequently pulls the mind back towards its frame of reference. So for example, a dominant extrovert will have a difficult time working on the auxiliary introverted function because the extroverted function keeps wanting to pull them all across the next hill and dale. And of course, vice versa is true for a dominant introverted function as well. For this reason, it's mainly important for dominant extroverted intuitives to surround themselves with other people who are more conscious in their problem solving to help tide them over this flow gap, by which I mean when they're not in the flow to solve problems in an intuitive fashion, instead of simply being left up the creek, they can fall back on other people who have perhaps a less shiny but more reliable method of dealing with problems in the moment. Additionally, it'd be good for the dominant NE type to remember that whilst these types may have, again, a less shiny way of solving problems, it is generally more reliable. You don't get a sort of skills gap across different questions, where sometimes the unconscious can chime in and say something and sometimes it simply can't. So for example, a TE type, as long as a problem is generally within his skills range, will be able to work out at least a fairly serviceable plan for dealing with something even if it hasn't been addressed previously. Whereas an NE type might tap into the unconscious, find that there's nothing there, and simply have to throw up his hands and walk away. By virtue of the mandatory nature of many portions of life, this frequently is not a sound policy, and therefore NE types would do well to, again, surround themselves in types who can tide them over this particular gap in their skills. So to round out, dominant extroverted intuitives frequently solve problems by virtue of intuitive hunches and perceptions that show them the way forwards. They frequently can't account for these because they come from the unconscious. By virtue of coming from the unconscious, it is very difficult to train their problem-solving skills, and therefore they frequently can run into problems they simply can't deal with because they're so dependent on the unconscious to provide the answer for them. Therefore, it would be good for them to surround themselves in more rational or more conscious problem solvers to help tie them over this area, and they should remember that if these types seem to be slower or less sexy in their problem-solving methods, that they frequently make up for it in reliability. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.